Hi, it's Nicole McGurk, and today I have a baby card to share with you featuring the Avery Elle Storybook Stamp Set and coordinating dies. I absolutely adore this stamp set, and so I just got it and I was really inspired to create a baby card just to have on hand. I've mentioned before in recent weeks that I tend to never have baby cards when I need them, and so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to make a few cards to have in my stash for whenever I have need of one. To start my card, I am using an older Avery Elle stamp set, Bright Days, to create my background. I am stamping this using the soft vanilla ink from Hero Arts, and I'm stamping it on a piece of paper that's going to be quite a bit bigger than what I'm actually going to use. But this way I can ensure that whatever size I end up die cutting this, that it will fit. I kind of like starting with a little bit bigger piece. It gives me a little bit more room to play, especially if I'm going to be die cutting it or something like that. I just feel like it gives me a little more margin for error. So I stamped the circle and then I stamped the sun rays, and I'm going to stamp this little burst as well right over top of that. It's really subtle, you don't really see it a lot, and I use the same color for all of it. I chose the soft vanilla because I wanted it to be really muted and not be an overwhelming yellow. I wanted it to be really soft to go with the baby-like theme. Now I'm using both the pierced rectangle stacks from My Favorite Things and also their rectangle stacks layers set 1, and I die cut the stamped background using the plain rectangle, and then using a rectangle slightly smaller with the pierced edge, I die cut the vellum so that I could overlay the stamped background with the vellum. That's one of my favorite looks in card making and creating backgrounds and scenes for other little images like this little deer that I'm going to be using. And so it's just one of my favorite ways to help mute the colors, maybe add those layers that add a lot of interest to a card. I stamped the deer from Storybook onto some smooth white cardstock using a black dye ink, and then I'm going to take some Prismacolor colored pencils and color in this deer, and I'm going to blend out all the colors with Gamsol, and I'm going to speed through it just to save a little bit of time, especially for the length of this particular card video, but I'm just going to keep coloring until I get the shading and detail that I want on my deer. And then I'm also going to do this very same process for one of the little butterfly images in this stamp set as well. And this is, using the color pencils has been one of my favorite ways of coloring all these little images lately. I can't get enough of it. There's just something about the softness of the colored pencil colors and then blending it with the Gamsol that just really gives such a nice look. I'm using a white pen from Sakura to add some dot detail to my deer, and also the black glaze pen to add detail to the nose, which you saw me do there, and I did add it to the eye later on as well. So here's that little butterfly that I'm going to color in with some kind of blues and kind of a bluish purple. This card is kind of an anything goes. I think it would go for either a boy or a girl. When I had started out, I was thinking more along the lines of creating a boy baby card, but really when I looked at it at the finished result, I thought it would work either way, and I like cards that work like that. Again, adding a little detail to the butterfly, and then a little glitter pin over the top of all of that for a little subtle sparkle. Next, I want to add a banner so that I can stamp the greeting from Storybook onto this banner. And originally I thought I would stamp the banner in yellow, or that soft vanilla that you saw there, but I ended up changing my mind, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. But I am stamping the solid banner image on smooth white cardstock, and then I'm stamping the outline on some vellum using Versamark, and I'm going to emboss this with white embossing powder. And the reason I'm doing it this way is I wanted to have an overlay. I love the look of a white sentiment embossed on vellum. However, I really wanted this particular banner to have a little bit of color behind it, or a little bit more to make it pop from, I hate to use the word pop because it doesn't really pop, but to help it stand out from the background a little bit. And so what I ended up doing is stamping the banner again using the Simon Says Stamp Fog, the lightest gray ink from one of their newest ink and cardstock release. And then I stamped the shadow portions of the banner, which this banner is awesome. It's called Build a Banner for a reason, because you really do build the banner. But the little shadow areas where it folds, I stamped with the Simon Says Stamp Smoke ink. So all I'm doing now is using the coordinating dies to die cut all of these pieces using these stamp sets and their coordinating dies. And then I'm just going to lay those to the side, and here's where I stamped the banner again using that fog and smoke ink that I was talking about. And it just, I liked it a little bit better. I think it made it a little bit easier to read, and it didn't blend into the background quite as much in the finished sample. And those are those little shadow pieces, which I just think are so fun and really make this banner stamp set stand alone or stand apart from some of the others. Now, where I stamped the grass on the vellum, I did take my heat tool to this because I just used the Simon Says Stamp black dye ink to stamp that on the vellum, not StazOn or anything like that. And I wanted it to dry so it wouldn't smear. But I took my colored pencil and just one color, I'm not using Gamsol, I'm not blending, but I colored that in a little bit to give it a little bit of color down there. Here's that banner with the gray stamped banner behind it, and you can see that the shadowing does show darker, and the light gray there does help it stand out when it peeks through that vellum. Now I wanted to add a few of the cute little doodle-like details from the Storybook Stamp Set. So I'm using my panner so I know my placement. I'm going to stamp a couple of these. I took my powder tool before I stamp that in Versamark just so that I make sure my embossing powder only sticks to what I have stamped. Add all of those. Add this again. I think this adds interest to the design. Just kind of a fun little detail piece. And I kept laying out my pieces because I wanted to make sure I got the placement right for my stamping and embossing. Once I have all of these little pieces stamped and have the embossing powder on them, I'm going to go ahead and heat set that. And then I'm ready to put my card together, which I'm going to have to be a little inventive with where I place my adhesive, since I am using quite a bit of vellum. I'm adding little dots of the liquid glue you can see there where it will hide behind the embossing on the vellum banner. And I'll set that aside to dry for a second. Placing a little adhesive there on my stamped, colored, and die cut pieces from Storybook. And I like to set acrylic blocks on my projects if I'm using any liquid glue at all, because it helps the vellum not curl up as the glue dries. It dries quickly. All of those embossed little doodles, I added a little bit of yellow colored pencil to those. Finally, I'm going to take this quilted pattern background die from Little Inkers, and I'm embossing or die cutting. It kind of gives a stitched die cut design. I did that on vellum, and then I'm going to lay that over a white cardstock card base, And I'm going to now place a little adhesive behind some of my solid elements where I've added my stamped and all of my decorating, and place that over, or put the vellum then over my stamped sunshine background, use some foam adhesive, and then pop that up on my card. Finally, I just kind of scattered a couple of different types of sequins on my project, and I'm using a little glossy accents to attach these to my card since the sequins are so small, and my card is finished. I hope you've enjoyed this card featuring the Avery Elle Storybook Stamp Set and dies. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.